Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Behind the Door series. This is number 8. It's hard to believe we've been doing this for 2 months. It is part of LMB's hope that we can break the stigma of counseling. We're going to do that, I've been trying to do that, by showing you a little bit of what we do behind the door when the door closes, whether you're a caregiver or a client or a prospective client. So we've done that in a couple ways. If you look back through the different videos, we have tried to show some techniques that we use. We also use just kind of the foundational science that helps form our opinions about how to attack certain issues and certain problems. So, we've covered the shoulder technique, the decision tree, how to structure and schedule some of what's going on with the technology influences, electronic screen syndrome. Yeah, sleep obviously is a big one that we talked about. And then this week we're going to talk about popularity. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started, and also just give some people maybe an opportunity to get on. Please ask questions. This is meant to be interactive. I can stop and answer a question and pick back up right where I was. If you didn't get there's some handouts, 3 pages worth. If you didn't get that, you can go to our website, which is new, by the way. So we'd like for you to go there and just check it out anyway. But it's under tools and it's under popular in the tool section. I'll send it out through our email thread. So if you're not subscribed to that, just sign up there, and also can I think I can put it in the links to give you easier access to it, maybe through our Hootsuite, which is our social media. I did that earlier today, so hopefully everyone was able to get that. It's I'll show you the book. It's the science is based upon this book called Popular by Mitch Prinstein. He's a professor at Carolina, so don't hold that against him if you're not a Carolina fan. But it is science-based. It's not just hyperbole, but did a lot of research and observation and testing through the scientific method, just to be able to get some of these ideas that we use. So what I did was read the book and just try to extrapolate some of the things that are very applicable to our population, particularly with our adolescents. The cool thing that came out of this research for me is that what happens to us in our middle school and high school years, let's just say our social interactions, our social story, becomes the foundation for how we see the world, interpret the world, see how we're interacting in the world in a very social way for the rest of our lives. So if you have access to the slides that I gave you, or the pages that I gave you, the first thing that you're going to see is that brain, and it just tried to point out the different areas. You're trying to think of, like we talked about with the decision tree and the shoulder techniques, is you think of, you got your cortex here, which is your computer center. It doesn't get fully developed till you're in your mid-20s, and maybe slightly later if you're a male. And then you've got the amygdala and the hippocampus, and those are the centers that are kind of underneath the brainstem, and they're on board right away, like we talked about in some of the earlier Behind the Door series, and they're incredible influencers. So what happens when you are in your teenage years, there's this network called the ventral striatum, and what happens is it becomes awake. It becomes alive. It was dormant. And so in your adolescence, pre-adolescence, adolescence years, this network awakes, like we said. And so why that's important is this network is all about socialization. So I'm sure you've figured out or even thought about, like, why is my kid, or just observing teenagers, like, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? Why are they dressing this way? Why are they acting that way? Why do they listen to this, do that, believe that? It's because of that network. That network's design is to get information and then solidify that information so you can understand how you're interacting in the world. And what it's really trying to do is give you the opportunity, the network, to be able to socialize correctly. So the stronger that network, the more likely you are to be influenced by peer pressure. And peer pressure, by the way, isn't negative. It always. Sometimes it's positive. There's a lot of things that people do, and if you're in that group and it's a positive thing, well, that's positive peer pressure. So sometimes peer pressure gets a bad rap, but the idea of this network is that's what it's doing. It's computing, getting information, and making decisions that's influencing your cortex and helping you decide how to do things in certain situations in certain moments. So if it has bad information, or if you're in a bad, we call them social bubbles, then that information is getting stored and you continue to act upon that information. That's why you see people continuing to make poor decisions or good decisions for the most part. There's also a natural, just kind of biological progression that happens during that time too. You start seeing kids pull away from their parents, which is a natural thing. You want them to do that. Um, and then you hope that the morals and values are in place that allow them as they pull away to make sound decisions. Well, this is also happening while that network is coming on board. So it has really big influences on when they're starting to pull away those decisions that they're making, like you talked about. So one of the foundations that the author talks about in this book is the idea between status and likability. And status is about attention, power, and likability is about how well you relate to others. And he goes into talking about some of the problems with popularity and how it is all-consuming. There is no finish line. He even breaks down the popularity. What's he call it? Sorry, the impact of being popular. He's got stages of popularity. There's like 7 stages, kind of like stages of grief, like we talked about before. But this is actually stages. So you go from one all the way to the end, and a lot of it does not have happy endings. It's a lot of despair and depression and isolation and feeling like you need to hold on to something that is really never attainable and can be taken away very quickly. Well, kids, teenagers, are looking for that status. They're looking for that hierarchy. They want to rise up to the top. One of the activities that we do a lot of times with our teenagers, especially our middle schoolers, is you just draw a line from 1 to 10, and you say, where are you on that line? Inevitably they'll put themselves somewhere. Very, very rarely have I ever seen a kid put themselves like a 9 or 10. And they'll have some people above and some people below. And then you start asking, well, who else is around you? Who are you friends with? And then you ask, well, what's going on here with the kids at the top and what's going on with the kids at the bottom? Um, and inevitably, they all usually, everyone has someone in their bubble. And we start drawing circles around who they're friends with and not friends with. And then you take this linear line, this vertical line, and you flip it and say, well, this is what the world's really like. It's about who's in your bubble, because if you play football, well, then inherently you may not be in with the cello bubble. And that as long as you have this group and you have interests and you have similar morals and values, well, then you have friends. And by definition, you are popular instead of worrying about some hierarchy. But that network that we were talking about kind of lends them up to this hierarchy of thinking and thinking they need to climb, 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 climb. And if they're not at the top, then in some ways they're just not as good. And that creates a problem. What has happened lately, let's say over the last decade or so, is that problem has exploded. Because it used to be very clear who was popular, who our celebrities were, the ways to go about doing that. Just think of traditional, whether it's people in the movies or TV shows or singers or maybe even people to some extent, politicians, things like that. They had celebrity status. Nowadays, you can create a TikTok account or a YouTube channel or do something like this, or just have an interesting tweet, and you can get very quick admiration, very quick likes, and if you're really great, you might even get some more public publicity through the traditional media sources. But either way, there are so many routes to go about trying to chase this idea of popularity, which is status, and it creates a really bad loop system while kids are teenagers. Because going back to this network is designed to go get that. And so if you're doing things like we talked about before in Other Behind Door, the series, that give you that little bit of upshot of dopamine when you're like, hey, someone liked my picture, or they like my TikTok, or they like this or that or the other, like you want to keep doing it. And it's not a sustainable process. And you begin to relate to the world in a very one-dimensional way, which is, hey, I send these things out and people like them or they don't like them. And when they don't have enough impact or bearing, then people don't get the dopamine and they start getting sad and depressed or anxious and people don't like me as much. And all this is really easy influenced as a teenager, um, because the wall in between the cortex that we described before and the amygdala and that network is not strong enough to deal with all the information that's coming into the cortex. It can't make sense because it's so emotionally charged stuff that the cortex can't sit there and say, all right, let me break this apart, break that apart. That's fact, not fact. It's just a lot of emotion and neurochemicals getting dumped into that part of the brain that is influencing these decisions that these kids are making. So that's what's happening coming from a brain formation standpoint. That's why you're seeing at times, we know that kids are more predisposed or maybe depressed. They tend to look up more at what people have or who they are. And people that are more well adjusted don't get as influenced by the social media as people that are looking for heroes, looking for status symbols. So what we figured out, and what this author figured out, that if you focus on likability rather than status, and likability is there's 7 different traits that he defined. It's how well do you get along with others? Do you cause drama for the group? Are you smart but not too smart, which means you want to dominate the conversation? You don't interrupt others. You're pretty good at handling awkward social situations. And just generally pretty well adjusted. You can hold your end of a conversation. You can talk about various topics rather than dominating one topic and knowing a lot about, like, let's say, Fortnite. You can talk about other things. If you have those traits and focus on those traits, then your outcome measures are incredible. You have a much higher chance of living a longer life. You have less health issues. Your income upward mobility is much higher. Less chances of drug and addiction issues if you focus on these 7 traits of likability. So if you're able to kind of steer the network away from just seeking likes and quick feedback, but building relationships and having communication and being able to adapt and learn and converse with other people, like over time, or the continuum of time, that those traits of likability become more evident, and the brain is getting conditioned to focus on those things rather than the quick hits of did someone laugh at this joke, or did someone like my song on TikTok, or did I get enough posts? And not that you can't necessarily do those things, but it has to be, if you focus on the likability, then that's your intent, and you're kind of insulated from, hey, I put this thing out there on social media and people loved it or hated it. It's not as impactful. But if that's the way you're trying to relate to my light just went out, I'm sorry. If that's how you're trying to relate to your peers, it doesn't create a great opportunity for longevity. So on the third slide, there's some things that you can do as parents. And depending on where you are, what stages your kids are in, and it's just kind of basic development stuff. It's kind of like in the beginning, you want to focus really hard in the beginning, is like when they're little, focus really hard on your morals and your values. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of coaching to get kids through these things. Kind of think of potty training. Like you got to work really hard in the beginning, and it's like all hands on deck until you get that first successful time when they go to the bathroom. And then there's, generally a huge celebration. And over time, you may ask, you may check in, do you need to go to the bathroom? And then before you know it, they're just going to the bathroom on their own. Parenting in general is kind of like that. Like whatever you're focusing on, you spend a lot of energy and time on it. And then over time, once you see that they have some automation, like we've talked about before, and some mastery over the skill or the value that you're trying to teach, well, then you can step away a little bit from it. they in the book they call it scaffolding. So you build all these ways to kind of teach your kids the things that they need to know, that hey, likability is very important, and not chasing things. And you do that from a very young age, and over time it just becomes more automated, even when that network wakes up, because those values and those morals are already there. And so even if you've had some, let's say, negative experiences as a teenager or as a child, you can still reroute that network. I mean, that's a lot of what we talked about with not behind the door series, but behind the door series with the shoulder technique and the decision tree. You can still work on that network to make sure that you're getting a true representation of what's occurring in the moment, even if you had some bad experiences as a teenager. And reshape and kind of reroute the desire to go get some status, and focus more on the long-term picture of likability. And in most instances, especially in our practice with kids that we see, they have a lot of those traits, but they've been wrapped up in status and hierarchy, so their values have been misaligned, and they're not able to achieve something that is sustainable and long term. And we just try to kind of reroute that network back to places where it is likability, and say, hey, you already have a lot of these traits. Let's work on those. You already have those strengths, rather than going and chasing something that's not sustainable. So I'll put the book out there as well as one of the links, but kind of in a nutshell. And I always want to keep these things to under 20 minutes, because I know everyone's time is precious. In a nutshell, that's kind of what this is. This is what popularity is. That's how people are chasing status rather than likability. And if you focus on likability, your outcome measures are great. And if you focus on status, that they're not very good. I know it gets pretty convoluted in the world that we're living in now. Not even, I know even with COVID, it gets a little bit worse, because it feels like we're supposed to be on our phones, and that's how we're supposed to connect, because we have less opportunity to have interaction. And I know that, with a lot of the announcements with the school systems over the past couple of days, that it feels even harder. But there are ways to do it, and there are ways to parent that likability traits. If you have any questions right now, I'd be happy to answer them. Like I said before, please go and check out our new website. We just launched it last Friday. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there's anything we need to debug. We worked really hard on it. Michael worked really hard on it to get that website working. And we're also going to do a parenting series for 4 consecutive weeks, starting next Thursday, the 23rd at 5 o'clock. We're going to do that for 10 participants. And caregivers, if they're on the same computer, can be one participant. So if you're interested in doing that, because we've already got a couple people signed up, please reach out to me, and that way I'll know to hold your spot. I'm not seeing any questions, so what we'll do is we'll wrap up. Thank you for being here. If you are interested in some things next week, some topics, please reach out and let me know. I got a couple things I can talk about, but if there's some things that are more pressing, I'd love to talk about those as well. All right, hope you have a very healthy rest of your week and weekend, and I hopefully see you next week.